G'day everyone, sorry I am 7 minutes late. I am just online now. I'm going live. If you're there, please give me a thumbs up or write a comment in below telling me that you can hear me and that the sound is okay. Hopefully we've got fast internet. Sometimes at this time of day the sound might be a little bit delayed, but I've got the cable jacked in, so hopefully we're a little bit quicker. For those of you that haven't met me, my name's Ryan Tate. I'm a professional dog trainer and I've been engaged today to talk about the most common bad habits that pet owners want help with. So we're going to break down 4 areas today that have subtopics within them, and I'm going to kick it off by talking about barking. All right, great. Got a bunch of comments here saying that the sound is good. That's wonderful. So I'm going to dive straight into barking, and over the next half an hour break down a few of the most common problems that pet owners have. Particularly, this survey was aimed at people in the southeast Queensland area. So we're trying to tackle issues that we know people within that area have had with their dogs and want easy, tangible solutions they can apply to their dogs. So the first topic that I'm going to talk about is barking. Now, what I want you to think about if you have a barking dog, or if your neighbor has a barking dog, or your friend does, is what is the root cause of the barking? What is creating the barking? And in my mind, the number one, and certainly the data would suggest that the number one reason that we get most complaints about dogs barking, or most problems with dogs barking, is stemming from some type of anxiety, specifically separation anxiety, or what we might refer to as separation distress. So that is typically a dog that at a certain time of day might be left alone outside or in the house, or everyone goes to work or everyone goes to bed, and the dog isn't coping with being left alone. Now, dogs are social obligates. That means they internally are wired to seek companionship, whether that be with their own species or their own breed, or whether it be with other species. Some dogs are really comfortable in the presence of chickens and ducks and livestock, and others really gravitate towards fellow canines, and then most dogs really want to be around their owners, want to be around their family that they've grown up with. And ultimately, the solution to separation anxiety is having your dog go everywhere with you. Now, that's not necessarily achievable for everyone, although at the moment most people are working from home more than ever. And what that may mean is that when you do start leaving home, as lockdown restrictions are easing and travel becomes accessible, is that your dog may experience anxiety. They might feel like their leg's being cut off when you're not home. So how do we deal with that? How do we break that down? So there's a couple of really nice things you should start doing now if you think you have an anxious dog. And the first thing is, try and make more pleasant things happen when the dog is left alone. For example, if I have a dog that is somewhat anxious here at my place, I'll find out what its favorite things are. It might be ripping apart cardboard boxes that I smear peanut butter on. It might be chewing on a pig's ear, or bits of chicken, or maybe the lamb brisket bone is a really nice chewy one for young dogs and small dogs. Or it might be solving a Kong puzzle or a food puzzle. And I will save up those things and I'll do them multiple times throughout the day, or as often as I can, but I'll give it to the dog in a special space where that dog is alone. It's physically restricted from being with me. I want to make that time alone valuable. So the dog never eats, never gets to chew its favorite chew toy in the presence of people. It's always done when the dog is alone. As well, what I want to do is boost up my exercises outside of that make the dog feel good, that get good hormones released through the body. So we know that things like play and physical exercise and problem solving for our dogs get good oxytocin hits, which means they are more capable of settling and more capable of dealing with anxiety. So I boost all those things that I just spoke about before. I play silly buggers, I play hide and seek, I play fetch, I play tug of war, I do longer walks, more sniffing, a bit of obedience, get the brain going, and I want to get that dog really holistically fulfilled, as well as knowing that whenever it's left alone, that's the best time to chew, to eat, to tear something apart. So we're creating this nice cycle of, I get all these fulfilling activities, and then when I'm left alone, I get something amazing to chew and rip apart. Now, we can also add into that intentional soothing exercises like I need. I'm a high drive, high energy person. I was just talking to my wife this afternoon that I need to learn how to actively settle down. I can run all day, I can skate, surf, train dogs, hike all day, but I struggle to settle sometimes, and I need to actively work on unlocking the part of my brain that settles me down. So that's through things like meditation, getting massage, stretching, having quiet time on the couch with my kids, and training myself to do that more often means I can sleep better at night and switch my brain off. So we need to do that with some of our really highly strung dogs. We need to get them to lay down on a comfy bed, sit down with them, give them a massage, rub their neck, rub their body over, and get the dog learning how to actually settle. So I typically do that in the form of place training, or training the dog to go to a bed and teaching it that we have a chill out space here and unlocking part of their brain to help them calming down. The next one as well for anxiety is crate training. Okay, if you're only leaving your dog for a few hours here and there, teaching your dog to go into a crate, a den-like structure, or what's often referred to as the denning method, where we make the crate have a nice blanket over the top. We put some really comfy bedding. We might put a couple of Snuggie chew toys in there, or maybe some of our own clothes in that crate as well. And we build it up very, very short periods of time. So we make the crate positive 20 seconds at a time, 30 seconds at a time. And over a couple of weeks, we build it up to the point where the dog goes, this space is lovely. Whenever I get popped in here, I get a chew toy and a comfy bed, and there's this big blanket over it blocking out external stimulus. I'll learn how to settle down. So don't underestimate those uses of anxiety reduction exercises that then have a flow-on effect to less generalized barking overall. Okay, so the next most common reason that dogs bark is frustration barking. So often they can see things that they want to get to, or that perhaps it's worked for them. They bark at the back door because they're frustrated, they want to get to the family, and the family opens the back door and lets the dog in. Okay, or they bark at the side gate to say hello to the neighbor comes and says hello to them, or the neighbor's dog barks back at the fence through them. So this kind of frustration, or what I would often refer to as learnt behavior barking, is something that operates less emotionally like anxiety does, and more from an operant conditioning part of the brain, that the dog goes, if I bark at the back door, you will open it for me. And the more I bark, the quicker you come to the door. We need to actively teach those dogs that barking is no longer successful. So what I might do is say, I pop the dog outside, and if the dog hasn't barked for 10 seconds, I'll invite the dog back inside. Ask the dog to go outside, maybe give it a bit of scatter feed of food. And if the dog's just eating its food and hasn't barked, I'll open the door and invite the dog back inside. I want to teach the dog that you can come in and out of the door. It's possible to go in and out of the door without barking. You can be halfway through eating, you can be just sent out for 2 seconds, and I'm going to call you back in. So first things first, I teach the dog you can actually come in and out of the front door, in and out of the side gate, or perhaps it's getting your lead on and off to go for a walk. We can do these things without barking. Then eventually one day the dog's going to, or even within that training session, the dog is going to bark at the back door. And the key is to, in that moment, is to not open the door. You need to get at least 10 seconds of silence before opening the door, or before giving the dog what it wants. So for example, a lot of dogs bark and learn to bark when the owners pick up the lead to go for a walk, or they pick up a tennis ball to throw it. And the dog's barking, carrying on, whipping itself up, and the owners go, oh, okay, better throw the ball. No, stop, wait 10 seconds. Or the lead's ready to go, better clip it on, get out the door. No, wait for 10 seconds of silence. Now, the first couple of times you do this, the dog might bark more and louder and more frustrated, more frantically. And what you want to wait for is it to get so crazy that then eventually the dog takes a breather, okay? And then the dog goes, oh, maybe we're not going for a walk. Maybe she's not going to throw the ball or open the door. You wait for that, ideally 10 seconds of silence, and then clip the lead on, head out the door, or throw the ball, or open the door, or whatever it may be. So look for those moments for a win. Trying to aim for success, but if the dog does start barking at you for something, where it knows there is a direct consequence of that bark that is positive for the dog, you need to ideally wait it out. It's not an emotional response, it's a learnt response. All right, and one of the reasons we had here that Patricia commented as well, and sometimes we need to acknowledge that barking is natural. There is a certain element of barking that all dog owners need to accept. Now, the street that I live in here, I think literally everyone in our street has multiple dogs, and we're all on reasonable sized blocks, but everyone can kind of see each other's business to a degree. And everyone has a pretty nice understanding that when someone gets home, that dog might bark or the neighbor's dog might bark. But everyone's kind of okay with that. The neighborhood's pretty friendly. Everyone's had lots of discussions about, you know, if someone arrives at your property and my dogs bark, that's okay. If, you know, someone's skulking around in, you know, high vis, checking meters once a quarter, of course, a couple of the neighborhood dogs are going to bark. Now, if any of the dogs are barking excessively throughout the day, someone will send a text message out, or someone will say, hey, is that Greg's dog, or is that Ryan's dog, or is that Pete's dog? And we'll try and work out what's going on. But there is, within our neighborhood, there's an understanding that because it's a quiet little street and the dogs usually know all the standard people, that anytime a delivery driver arrives or, you know, some council workers are doing work, that, you know, the dogs in the house that it's out the front of and the dogs next door might bark. The key is, though, is to, how do we then get the dogs to settle down after that? So in my household, my rules for the dogs are, if someone pulls into the driveway, you're allowed to bark, okay? That's the somewhat arbitrary rule that we have for the dogs that live with us. Today, we have 8 dogs here today, and when someone arrives, they'll bark, and that's fine, okay? I allow roughly, I reckon, about 5 to 10 seconds of barking. Then I go outside, and in a happy tone, I say to my dogs, thank you. Thanks, dogs. Okay, that's enough. I literally say that sentence to them. What that does is, it lets the dogs know that I acknowledge someone has arrived, and I acknowledge that you're barking at someone new, a vehicle, a delivery vehicle out the front, and for you as a dog, that's unusual. So I go out, but in a happy tone, I say, thanks, dogs, that's enough. And the dogs go, well, he's acknowledged my barking. He seems upbeat, so there potentially isn't something to worry about. And they were worried. Now, on the flip side of that, if I went outside and very aggressively said to my dogs, cut it out, that's enough, shut up, I am demonstrating the actions of an anxious person, of a stressful event. And what I am likely to create then is more anxiety and more stress, potentially aggression within my dogs. And my dogs don't necessarily understand that I'm upset with them. They believe that the delivery driver has made me upset. They think I'm yelling potentially at the delivery driver, or the arrival of the postman has upset me as much as it's upset them. What we now create is a vicious cycle of more prevalent, more aggressive, and more frustrated barking from our dogs every time someone arrives. Okay, so it's very much an emotional contagion event that we can approach it in a nice, happy, upbeat tone, and then our dogs will feed off that. Obviously, when people arrive, we can do things like teach our dogs to go to a bed, or we can, you know, ask them to come and give them a treat and help settle the situation down like that. But for me, with 8 dogs here today, the easiest thing I can do is just say, hey guys, thanks, that's all good, that's enough. And then the dogs trust that I'm in a good mood. Now, we have a couple of questions here about things like barking at birds, Kath's dog, and Angie, we will talk about your bull Arab and jumping. That is one of the topics we've got here to talk about. Barking at birds, Kath, is, again, within that natural realm, okay? So I had down here, yeah, barking at possums and birds is something that is incredibly natural within dogs and quite self-reinforcing. So the dogs, they practice the barking at the birds, and the birds move or they flap, and the dog feels good, and watching the birds feels good. And the nuts and the bolts of that is, you do need to do probably 2 things, okay? I have a young puppy here at the moment who just started chasing birds, and she's not fully fixated on it yet and she's not barking, but what will come if I don't address it is barking will eventually be around the corner, okay? So what I'm trying to do for her is in the afternoon when she's normally, like your dog, is starting to be on the prowl for birds coming into the trees around our property and nesting for the night, is I'm out there with her while the birds are out, and I'm trying to make myself and the toys that I have, like so frisbees, tennis balls, tug toys, as arousing and as exciting as possible. I'm redirecting the attention away from the birds and having a bloody great time. What I'm doing there is I'm desensitizing the dog a little bit to the birds, but I'm also making these games fulfill that part of the brain, the dog's predatory drive, the dog that wants to chase and bark at small prey items, which is birds, and we're redirecting that into toys. Now, as a backup, I'll have the dog on a long line, so 10 meters of rope, and if the dog redirects from the toys and goes for the birds, the dog gets removed physically on lead to a quieter location. So what I want to teach my dog is as soon as you bark at the birds, hey mate, the fun's over. All right. And again, for that magic time, about 10 seconds. Fun's over for 10 seconds. All right. What I usually do here, we just got a little shed. And when the dogs, go chase a bird or a kangaroo or whatever, they're on a long line, they go straight back into the shed. We have 10 seconds of chill out time. We go back outside, we try and play with the toys again. And say to the dog, hey, you can be out here having a blast if your energy is focused onto the toys and onto me or whatever I'm doing. The minute you direct that onto the birds, onto the kangaroos, or onto the sheep, you go back into a boring location. And through repetition of making that successful, but also preventing the barking at the birds from happening, you will absolutely reduce that. If your dog, Kath, has been practicing it for years, you may never extinguish it, but you can certainly reduce the prevalence. What you can also do is consider some management strategies, like we do for dogs barking at possums at night. Bring the dog inside it when you know the possums are going to be out. Or if you know in the afternoons the birds are going to be in a particular location where the dog can see it, try and at that time of day, if possible, give your dog a bone in a different location where it's less likely to practice that. So management strategies, where we put something physical in place to prevent the likelihood of the barking occurring, is really, really useful in this kind of setting. So the goals around barking is essentially, it's kind of three things. We want to teach the dog that barking isn't successful, so it doesn't get you what you want. It gets you taken away from what you want. We also want to fulfill the dog, make the dog feel very good by fun exercises that get the right kind of endorphins going in our dogs to make anxious and frustration type barking less likely to occur. And then we want to manage the situation, prevent barking from occurring in the first place, prevent your dog from being in those locations or seeing those things. Sometimes that may mean putting shade cloth up the side of your property. It might mean bringing the dog inside at certain times of day or night to make that less likely. Now, if your dogs have things like motorbikes or particular sounds of birds that, startle them and make them want to bark, you can also, there's a brilliant app called the Soundproof Puppy app, where that has specific sounds that typically make dogs bark, and it has some really good instructions on that app of how and when to play that sound to your dog, particularly like during times when you're preparing and giving the dog their dinner, to have a counter conditioning effect to that barking sound. So that's something, for motorbikes, lawnmowers, planes and birds, etc. Yeah, there's some really great tips on that app that can help you quite seamlessly reduce the excitement around that. As I said, for some of you who have been dealing with it for years, you're not going to completely extinguish it, but if you've got a dog that's 1 or 8 months old, 6 months old, like my little pup is, with the right management, the right training, you can extinguish almost all barking. Here at my house, barking is not that common. For 8 dogs here, it's really, honestly, in my street, our dogs probably bark the least out of anyone else's house. And not that I'm saying my neighbors are bad at all. My neighbors are fantastic and their dogs don't bark much. But honestly, Rafa barks when someone arrives. Some of the spaniels do occasionally. And that's about it. So I think the strategies I'm suggesting are hopefully going to work. All right, so next on the hit list isn't jumping. It's just a quick one. It's begging for food. Quite a lot of people have said that begging for food is one of the most frustrating things that their dog does. Now, unfortunately, for those of you that have a dog that begs for food, you've trained it, okay? You've made that in some way, shape or form, you have made that happen within your dog, or your children have, or in my case, my mum loves to feed the dogs her toast in the morning, even lets them sip her tea, which drives me nuts, but all my dogs love my mum. So how do we prevent begging for food happening? Obviously, the number one thing here, well, maybe not obviously for all of you, but the number one tip I have is don't randomly give your dog food, particularly while you're eating, okay? There are only going to be some exceptions to this. The exceptions for me are that if my dog is on its bed laying down while I'm eating something, particularly puppies that I'm training, I'm training them to go to their bed, and I'm eating something and the dog is staying on its bed, I might break a bit off and throw it to it, okay? But apart from that situation, I will never give my dog food that I am eating randomly. I give my dog treats during training and on walks, and I might save up some of my meal for training. If I've got some leftover egg or some chicken or something like that, absolutely, I'll save it up for training sessions with my dogs, or for walks, or for recall training, or whatever it may be. Or I might, put it in their dinner, but I'm not going to give it to them from the table, particularly because I do have 8 dogs. Not all of them are in the house at the same time, but I might have multiple dogs in the house. I've got 3 kids. If my dogs are expecting food from the dinner table, there is a really high likelihood of frustration amongst my dogs and then fighting happening amongst my dogs under the table. So I don't feed them off the table unless they're laying on a bed. So obviously then the next thing is you must train your dog to go to a bed. You've got to train your dog. It's one of the best behaviors. I already spoke about it with anxiety before, particularly for begging for food, jumping, which we're about to talk for Angie and her bull Arab. Go to bed is one of the best behaviors you can train your dog. And it's super simple. And there's essentially no bad way to do it. You can do it on lead, you can do it with food, you can do it by just giving the dog affection on the bed. But I only have 2 rules that I want you to put in place when you're teaching your dog to go to a bed. First one is when you ask the dog to go to a bed, it must go there, okay? Whether that be you luring it with food, or you can take it there on lead, or you can encourage it over by your praise and affection. But if you ask it to go there, it's going to happen on the first time you ask it, okay? So that's rule number 1. The second rule for teaching the dog to go to a bed is that the dog cannot leave the bed until you say free, or until you release the dog, or until you ask it off. Now, one of the good questions that I almost always get asked with this is, what if the dog takes itself to the bed? If the dog takes itself to the bed, no rules. That's a nice dog. I'll give it a reward, but the implied stay isn't there, okay? So the dog can come and go as it pleases. But if I ask it to go to the bed, I want it to stay there until it hears a release cue. I typically say free or okay or something like that. Don't stress too much about the words that you use for such an informal behavior like going to the bed. Now, another thing you can do that might help with teaching your dog to not beg for food, and again for jumping and overexcitable, is what we call the cafe dog exercise. And that is where you imagine the perfect dog at the cafe, right? You're sipping a cup of tea or coffee and the dog's tied up on lead next to you, chilling out without a care in the world to all the action that is going on around the dog. That's the cafe dog, right? If you want your dog to be that cafe dog and chill out in any situation while you're eating or you're drinking coffee or whatever, you've got to practice this at home in low distraction situations. Typically, I'd start it when I'm on the computer or when I'm watching TV, okay? So I tie the dog up next to me, and when the dog, typically it's a puppy or it's a brand new dog that I've brought home, when the dog's on lead, tied to something solid like my chair, it might be unfamiliar for the dog. The dog might see that I've got food. It might see that I'm doing something and just be bouncing around like crazy. What I essentially do is I stay with the dog. I stay pretty calm. I might give it some smooth pats. I'm not going to give it any food. I'm not going to rev it up. I'm not going to talk to it too much. I'm going to teach the dog that when I'm in a chair and you're on lead or you're next to me, we just need to chill out. All right? Sometimes that takes time. It might take some smooth pats. It might take some patience. Once the dog settles into this exercise, the reward is just unclipping the lead. Okay, I don't give it treats. I don't say, yes, good dog. I don't throw it a ball or anything. I don't want to rev it up. I just want to unclip the lead and give the dog freedom again and say to the dog, you know what, mate? If I'm in a chair and you're in a chair and there's a bit of action going on, the best thing you can do is chill out by my side, and I'm going to pat you occasionally. Okay, so that's what we would call the cafe dog exercise. You can, in the beginning of that exercise, particularly with puppies, you can introduce chew toys. You might give them some low-value food on the ground, but typically we just want the dog to chill out in that exercise. Okay, so on to jumping. All right, so Angie's dog is a 1-year-old bull Arab, and he jumps when he gets excited. Okay, so couple of things to stop jumping. The first one is we want to teach the dog that you only get treats, affection, and attention when all 4 paws are on the floor, okay? There's a number of ways we can do this. We can train an amazing sit. We can train an amazing down, luring them with treats for those things, adding them on cue or command. But also, every time the dog jumps up on us, turn away and walk off. Okay, if the dog's like a repeat offender throughout the day in the house, I'd have the dog tethered on lead to something in the house. And I'd go in and I'd give the dog affection. I'd give the dog a bit of a pat, and often the dog gets so excited by the affection, particularly bull Arabs. I've worked with heaps of them, giving them some love, roughing them up, and then the dog goes, oh my God, this is so much fun. Bam, it jumps up on me and starts licking me all over the face. I stand back, and because the dog's tethered to something solid, the dog no longer has contact with me. In effect, we've punished the dog for jumping, okay? It's a very mild, a very ethical form of punishment, but the dog, by me stepping away, we've introduced what we call negative punishment. You were having fun with me, you jumped on me, you're a 47-kilo dog, that's potentially dangerous. I step back. I take myself out of the equation. Once all 4 paws are on the ground for 10 seconds, then I'm going to come back in. So the dog's been jumping, gets back down, I've stepped away, all 4 paws are on the ground. I count to 10 in my head, I go back in and give the dog attention. Ideally, we want to train that dog to sit and drop so often for affection and for rewards that the dog offers up when it sees someone and wants a pat. It just offers a sit without being asked. And particularly when I practice this exercise on lead, I might ask for the occasional sit, and I like to see the dog going, oh, I jumped on you, you didn't want that. Let me think about it. And the dog goes, I wonder if I sit. The dog sits, I'm still counting to 10 in my head, then I come in and give it affection. The reason it's 10 seconds, okay, is because this is where so many dog owners go wrong, particularly with jumping and particularly with barking at the back door, is because if the dog jumps, then sits, and you immediately give it attention, within 10 seconds, or even a lot less, the dog learns what we call a chain or a sequence of behaviors. I jump, then I sit, then I get affection. The jump and the sit are married together, and we don't solve the problem at all. We just have a dog that's very good at jumping and sitting. So that 10 seconds after the jumping has ceased is critical in teaching the dog that jumping wasn't part of this sequence, buddy. 4 on the floor and or a sit and or a down are the only things that's going to bring my attention into you. Okay, now 2 questions here to unpack. Just because it's on topic, I'll answer Shannon's first, and then I'll jump back to you, Jessica. What about jumping kids? She doesn't jump on adults, but only on kids, okay? Depending on the dog's obedience level and how reliable it is around children and what kind of children we have, I try and make my kids treat machines for dogs, but only when the dog is in a down or a sit, okay? So what I typically do is, again, it depends on how old the kids are in the family or what kind of kids you have access to and the temperament of the dog, but I've done it in plenty of households where the dogs are lovable goofball dogs. They're not a danger to the children. The children can follow instructions. But I say to the parents, guess what? This week, you're not doing any training with the dog. You might walk the dog, but the children are doing all the training, and the children are going to carry around treat pouches with them. And all day, they're just going to call the dog and get it to sit and give it a treat. Call the dog, get it down or a drop and give it a treat. And we repeat this so often that the dog just offers up the sit again and again for the kids. It also puts the child in, a bit of a, in the dog's mind, a source of information, a source of activity, not something just to jump on and lick and play with. So we kind of reframing in the dog's mind what the child is. Often dogs that jump on children, view the kids as just a play buddy, someone to muck around with, not someone that teaches them how to sit and drop. So we want to reframe the child to the dog as a teacher, someone that can teach them something. Obviously, the dog's going to need to learn some obedience from the parents or from the dog trainer, and that's going to be gradually passed over to children. It may not be able to happen within 1 or 2 days. You might need a week's worth of work, but you put in a bit of hard yards for a week, you teach the dog how to sit and drop, and then you get the kids involved in that process. It's absolutely going to work. Again, management is always useful. Having the dog on lead, if it's around the house, have a drag lead on the dog. So that's a short lead without a loop on the end of it. And as soon as the dog starts harassing the kids, you grab the lead, guide the dog to somewhere safer or out of the room. Okay. Now I just want to jump back before I forget it. Jessica asked a question, because honestly, this question, Jessica, is suitable for jumping and tackling kids, etc. How do you build duration for settling on a bed at a cafe, etc.? The pup is nearly 8 months old. So a couple of things you can do here, Jessica. Whenever we're building duration, so getting a dog to stay on a bed for a longer and longer period of time, we need to make sure that distraction and our distance away from the dog is less, all right? So whenever we're increasing duration, we need to decrease our distraction. So practice boosting the duration in super low stimulus, familiar locations like your lounge room, okay? And time it, okay? So what you might do is find that your dog's pretty chilled out on lead next to you on a bed in your lounge room and might be able to do 20 minutes. But then you might go out on the street and go, wow, my dog's just can't go beyond 30 seconds. And that's okay. You just need to build that dog's exposure up to the social experiences around it. Your dog's only 8 months old, so it's an adolescent. So, you know, you're probably, in my mind, at one of the most difficult ages with dogs for these kind of behaviors. 8 months of age, that, you know, they're right in the throes of just wanting to explore and wanting to be a typical teenager and be free and rebellious. So, you know, it's that balance of, yeah, put in some effort to the obedience, but monitor your environment. Sometimes the environment just may not be suitable to work on that duration of the down or the settling on the bed. So build it up around the house for now. Who was that question at? Sorry, Jessica. And then, you know, introduce it in really short increments to the cafe. Maybe get take your keep cup, get a takeaway coffee cup, sit out the front for like 30 seconds. When your dog's settled, you can give it a treat, then walk on, and then build that up gradually. So at home, 20 minutes, at the cafe, maybe 30 seconds. All right, now I'm getting down to Maria. Your 3-month-old bull Arab bites a younger child a lot, as if it's playing with another puppy, but it's quite painful for the child. If the child ignores the puppy doesn't give up at all. Look, Maria, I think, yeah, you've got a 3-month-old dog. Large breed dogs, again, like bull Arabs, they take a really long time to mature. They have a prolonged puppy phase. So what you need to do here is really, it's getting back to preventing the behavior from occurring. I'd suggest you get a puppy pen. Consider having the dog tethered when in and around the house. Also, get the child, if the child is old enough to do so, get the child involved in some training, doing some sits, doing some drops with the dogs. But the number one thing is don't let it occur, okay? So it needs to be some form of physical management. Now, this is not a long-term solution, Maria. It's a 3-month-old puppy that's probably going to stop teething in about 2 months, okay? So it's still, the puppy itself is teething and wants to mouth a whole lot of things and probably does view your child as another puppy. But right now, its mouth, the dog's mouth, is saying bite bloody everything, particularly my friends, which is unfortunately for your child, what the dog's going to do. And its teeth right now are probably the sharpest it's ever going to be. So it does not surprise me that your child finds it painful, because it would be painful. So short-term management for a couple of months, like literally 2 months, puppy pen, crates, on lead around the house, get a drag lead, get the dog used to being tied up, as well as getting your kid involved in some training with the dog, as well as doing increased stimulation, more chew toys, more toys and bones in general. And it will just, I promise you, it will just go away if you manage it for the next couple of months, okay, and increase the dog's ability to chew more sensible things. All right, so Haley has an 11-month-old border collie from digging. There was someone else that had a question about digging too, and the solutions for digging will vary depending on each case, but there's a couple of factors that influence digging. The first one that is often overlooked, but I find usually, well, I shouldn't say usually, but often the cause of it is that the dog has a little bit more food than it needs. And when the dog has a little bit more food than it needs, it is often triggered into a caching response. So let's say your border collie, I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but just for other people that are listening, let's say your dog eats half of its dinner, and then, or 3/4 of its dinner, even 90% of its dinner. If it leaves a couple of biscuits, if it leaves a bit of a bone, or it leaves a bit of food left over, it has an internal wiring that says to the dog, you didn't finish all your meal. Even if the dog might come back an hour later and finish it, there is still a process going on where the dog is saying, you're now a wolf in the Arctic and you need to prepare somewhere to stash this food for the cold winter ahead. So the dog goes into a digging response, digs a hole, getting ready to cache it. Now, your dog may not cache it. Not all dogs do cache. The puppy I have at the moment, absolutely, she has the strongest caching response of any dog I've ever owned, or probably I've ever seen. As soon as she has a bit of excess food, as soon as she has a toy stolen from the other dogs or a sock from my children, she digs a hole, chucks it in and covers it up. Most dogs I've had will do the first bit, but they rarely cover it up and cache it. Her brother, though, does the same thing. I spoke to someone that has one of her brothers. He does the same behavior. Okay, so that's one of the causes. So how do we fix that then? We give the dog less food. We give the dog a smaller window to eat a smaller volume of food. So if I know the dog is only eating 300 grams out of the 500 gram diet I've given it, what I'll do is I'll give the dog 250 grams, the dog will hoover that down, and then I might give it another smaller volume afterwards. Okay, so that's the food element. So we're removing excess food. I never leave bones around, try not to leave things laying around once the dog has decided it doesn't want to eat it. The other thing is, particularly in summer, our 11-month-old dogs are feeling their first proper summer coming on, and they've got a thick coat like border collies do at that age, and it's digging the ground to get cool. Okay, so we want to provide the dog with maybe a big clamshell of water that I find the dogs like to lay down in summer. The dog may also be digging for grubs at this time of year. If that's the case, you might want to pin down some chicken wire over the area where the dog is digging. If the dog is digging just for fun or looking for food, we can also place some of their poo in the hole that they were digging and cover it up as well. If all else fails and your dog just bloody loves digging, Haley, you can then buy a clamshell again, but just fill it with sand, hide toys, hide treats in the clamshell, and just let the dog have a pro digging space. If you can't extinguish it from the dog, which you might be able to, it's only 11 months old, then you know, the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Create a positive space where the dog can dig. All right, so clamshell, bury some dry treats in it, bury some toys in it, and let the dog dig. Okay, now we have a couple of questions here related to our last topic. Okay, dog reactive, scattered on leash, and the topic that we're looking at here is how do dogs respond or behave when they're over aroused. Okay, so there is a couple of ways that we can deal with dogs that are aggressive or reactive or over aroused and or not listening in the presence of certain stimulus. And there's a couple of things we need to consider. Now, Jen has here done it for another presentation. The socialization seesaw. Okay, now when we have dogs that are really scattered on lead and or out of the house or in the presence of certain things like dogs, people, motorbikes, etc., there's a reason that happens. Okay, so on the socialization seesaw, And you can see that. We have at either ends of the spectrum, we have no exposure or too much exposure. Now let's take, for example, dog aggressive or dog reactive dogs. That usually occurs because either the dog has not had sufficient exposure to that breed of dog, or it's had overexposure to that breed of dog, or maybe just dogs in general, okay? And with insufficient or over-the-top exposure, the dogs get extreme responses. What we need to focus on is short and pleasant experiences in the middle. I'll give you another example. Dogs that bark at motorbikes, okay? In my house here, no, actually no one barks. No one barks at the motorbike anymore. Ari, who passed away last year, he used to bark at the motorbike. The reason he barked at the motorbike is because that usually meant he and I were going on an adventure. So he barked at motorbikes occasionally because he's like, yes, we're going to go herding sheep, we're going to go running through the forest, I'm going to run alongside you on the dirt bike. But one of my neighbour's dogs, he barks at the motorbike because when he was a puppy, he'd probably never seen one. And, well, we know he'd never seen one as a puppy. So now this loud putting of the engine, moving wheels, big helmet, the dog finds that so foreign that then makes it bark. So we've got two ends of the spectrum. One dog's barking because he bloody loves it. The other dog's barking because he's bloody terrified. What you need to do is find out where on the spectrum your dog fits. But the reality is, whatever is making the dog reactive, it needs short, positive, and controlled experiences with that stimulus. So for dogs that are becoming dog aggressive, I would say, you know, your experiences might just need to be on lead at a distance from dogs. As your dog looks at another dog whilst it's on lead, if it doesn't react, you can give it a reward and keep going. Okay. The other thing, I mean, going back to being over aroused or overexcited, the other thing that we can work on is training our dogs with toys or interacting with our dogs with toys. Now, if your dog likes playing fetch or playing tug of war, you're in luck. If your dog doesn't like playing either of those games, I suggest experimenting with it. Don't necessarily overanalyze how the game works for your dog. Just to begin with, try and make it happen, make it fun, okay? Part of the goal of this is for you and your dog to have fun together, get a little bit lost in the moment, get a bit excited, okay? But once you have a dog that loves playing fetch, loves playing tug of war, it is in the same heightened aroused state that dogs often are when they see another dog, or when they see a bird, or when they see, you know, a motorbike or something that makes them chase, makes them pull, makes them hard to handle on lead. We want to teach the dog how to think when aroused, okay? So if your dog does not learn how to learn while being excited, it makes it very difficult to manage the dog in the presence of things like other dogs if they're aroused by them. So you need to play with your dog. You need to then, during play, introduce things like sit, stay, come. All right, back to play, back to fetch. All right, bring the ball back to my hand, do a down, stay, throw the ball, yes, fetch the ball. All right, now that might seem like a long reach for you right now, but start by playing with your dog more frequently. Give yourself 2 weeks just to play silly games with your dogs, with toys ideally, and then introduce something really simple like a sit, okay, and see how your dog enjoys the game when it's challenged, okay? Dogs crave challenges, successive challenges, okay? So if you can do this via play, you will proof your dog to being able to learn and think more readily when it's in high distraction environments. Now we have, how do you stop your dog from eating the cat's litter? $1 million question for Jessica Grace. Look, I've never had this problem. Jen and I had a cat years ago, and we never had the problem. But there's like, I've heard of all sorts of tips like squirting things on the cat poo and whatnot, putting chili or lemon and other things, wasabi. But I've got to be honest, I think, and honestly, I've never had to, this is a good one, Jessica, because I've never had to actually fully see a training plan through on this before. So I'm thinking of this somewhat on the fly. But my rationale was, when I was asked about this before, is that if your dog is literally eating cat poo, I don't think putting chili on it is going to work. The dog might just think you've just seasoned it for them. You know, if you're going to eat cat poo, what's chili going to do? I think it probably comes down to a management solution again. If you make a big deal about it, you know, I know with dogs eating their own poo or other dog poo, if you make a big deal about it, you definitely increase the excitement around the poo. So if you see the dog doing it, you go, ah, don't do that, and you come running in, the dog goes, well, clearly this is valuable because even the humans want to eat it. That's what the dog's thinking, right? So look, don't make a big deal about it would be the first thing, but the next one would really be about trying to put the litter in a location where it's less likely that a dog can access it. The other thing you could consider, which I had a client who did it, and I can't claim it, they were in a unit with a small backyard and they had a similar problem. Their Frenchie was eating their cat's poo, and they bought online, I don't know the name of the product, but they bought a kitty litter tray that goes over the top of the toilet, right? And essentially the kitty litter tray is like a babushka doll, right? So stay with me, this sounds crazy, I know. But you got a round kitty litter tray that you start with on the ground, okay? You get the dog used to that round, that's not dog, sorry, the cat pooing in that on the ground. Once the cat likes it, we elevate it. You know, you can put it on a platform or on something solid, or you can just go straight to the top of the dunny. Cats are great jumpers, right? So the cat jumps up, starts pooing on top of the toilet on the kitty litter tray. Then, once the cat is regularly pooing on top of the kitty litter tray, we introduce the next step of the babushka doll, which isn't actually getting smaller. It removes a small section from the middle of the kitty litter tray. So now the cat is pooing still in the kitty litter tray, but there's a small hole, only like that big in the middle of it. And the cat goes, there's a hole there. What's this all about? But the cat will usually still poo because 90% of the kitty litter tray is still very much the same, right? That might take a week of the cat getting used to that and successfully pooing there. Then what happens is the next week, we introduce the next piece of the babushka doll where the hole is a bit bigger. You see where I'm going? The hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually you get to a point where just you have a rim of kitty litter that goes around the toilet, and it's only, you know, the same width of the standard toilet seat with kitty litter in it. By that stage, the cat's merely just balancing on the toilet seat. Cats have amazing balance, and the cat's just pooing in the dunny. The next step, which is the biggest step, is removing the litter altogether. But by this stage, the litter's irrelevant, right? Because the cat can't, well, rarely will be balancing their butt and landing in the litter. It'll be landing in the toilet. So then you get rid of it altogether. And then you have a cat that poos in the dunny. The next amazing step would be to train the cat to flush it. I've never done that though. All right, so how do I stop my dog from barking at people who live in the house, but from barking when they come home or leave the house or even the room? Look, it depends on your dog's relationship with those people. But what I do, if it doesn't always work, but I leave the house at odd hours sometimes. We have various jobs where I need to take a dog to the airport to check on planes, or I might be going out spotlighting to see what animals our dogs have found. We have conservation detection dogs that look for animals like koalas. So I often come home late at night. But what I do, if my dogs don't know who it is, as I approach the property, I wind down my whistle and I do a specific whistle that I've taught the dogs means I'm about to come in, and it's me. It's not the boogeyman coming in at 1 a.m. to rob everyone. So what you can potentially do for your housemates is get them to play a game with the dog. From another room, do a whistle, say the dog's name, or click their fingers, but make a unique sound for that person and the dog. Okay? And once the dog hears that sound, they can be in the same room as the dog, or they can be approaching the room. The person gives the dog a treat. We want to teach the dog that when that person makes that sound, it means they're approaching the house or they're coming in the room, they're going to give you a treat. But you need to start in a low stimulus location where the dog already knows the person's there, so you're not surprising the person. So we need to teach the dog this sound successfully, where the person will not startle the dog, and the dog will have success in hearing the person whistle or hearing the person say the dog's name, and give the dog a reward. Once you've done that for probably 3 weeks, right? Don't do it when you're coming home for the first 3 weeks, okay? Tell them not to do it. You've got to condition the sound effectively, and then you can utilize it when the person is coming home. But the people need to form a relationship with the dog and teach the dog their voice or their sound in the room, and then start utilizing it when they come home. But I suspect potentially maybe a dog doesn't yet have a good relationship with those people, particularly if it's in and out of the room. So you might just need to work on those people, building a relationship with the dog via walking it, feeding it, playing games, teaching it some obedience, some tricks, etc. And or failing that, when, you know, if it's at night, for example, put the dog in a crate, put a radio on, put a blanket over the crate, and minimize the intensity of the sound of people coming in and out of the house. And like I would certainly utilize that around here to, you know, if we've got people coming in and out at random times, and I have a dog that might bark and wake up the kids, put it in a crate with a little bit of music on. All right, and that will certainly help the problem. Now, I have gone well and truly over time. And we've done lots of question and answers. I've ticked off my most important topics. So I will leave it there. But if you've liked what you've learnt today, you can check out my book if you want, How to Train Your Dog, that I wrote with my wife, Jennifer. You can also check out the Leave It website, put together by the Griffith University, which has lots of tips as well. I might even, let's see if I can put the link in here. I just want to make sure I've got the, oh no. So, I'm trying to get the website up, but it might be, it's probably on this page anyway. No, it's not there. I will get it anyway. We'll put it up. But Sharon, lovely to see you. Thanks everyone that joined in. And if yeah, if you want to find out more, check out the Leave It website. You can check out my book, How to Train Your Dog, and all the best with barking, jumping, over arousal, and what was the last one? Begging for food. All right, thanks everyone. Bye for now.